Saint JayGarcia Saturn, and honestly perfect timing for this video. After the recent chapters, his story has come to an end. But first things first, you guys always kill the like goals. So let's try for 150 on this video, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. So Saturn is actually one of the most frustrating characters to talk about in scale because he is so polar opposite. He actually has some underrated moments, but then has like very embarrassing showings that really make him look like trash. He also has abilities that are simply never explained, and it doesn't look like it's likely that they ever will be explained, given that he is no longer living. He is no longer in the story unless we get a flashback or something regarding it. But we're going to start things off with, of course, his introduction. He came at a different time than the rest of the Gorosei. He was the first one. He went there physically with Kizaru, but he showed up in his spider hybrid form in chapter 1094. He made his grand arrival, grabbing all the major players' attention and looking very imposing off the rip. Even got an early showcase of his power of head popping when he friendly fires some marines because they disobeyed. All Commodore rank and below aren't allowed to have an audience with them, so they're not supposed to be looking at him. And he took that shit personally and immediately head popped one of these early Marines. With that said, this is one of the abilities that we still have no idea how it works. Obviously here it looks like, he does something with his eye, but it looks a little bit different when he uses it later. And he uses this very selectively against selective opponents. It's really probably just chalked up to plot, but I wish we got some inverse answers. After this, we see kind of the infamous interaction between him and Bonnie. He was the reason that she has the devil fruit she has through experimentation. He's the reason her mom got sick and all this other shit. Bonnie goes up and stabs Saturn, but it's not an anti-feat because, Saturn literally says, hey, if I cared about her attack, I simply would have dodged. And this is kind of what I was talking about in my other Gorosei videos, where it's like if you apply this logic to a lot of their things, it can kind of change your mindset because they have a regenerative ability, which is almost like an instantaneous healing factor. They don't take any sustained damage, so it doesn't really matter. It's inconsequential whether or not they get hit or take attacks. He then uses his head pop ability on Bonnie, which seems to momentarily knock her out, which is actually pretty interesting because she tanked the 100% Labophase barrier and remained conscious after doing it. So that's a little agenda pushing right there. Or maybe you say like she sustained that damage or whatever the case. He then uses that same head pop ability on Sanji, which is able to knock Sanji off his feet, knock him to the ground and draw blood from him. Now Sanji's eyebrow isn't flipped here, so take that as you will as far as his durability goes. At that point, you see Frankie, Sanji, Vegapunk, all these characters standing in front of Saturn, and Saturn actually goes to use his poison legs to stab Luffy after his fight with Kizaru, where he was exhausted and couldn't defend himself. Frankie is easily able to react, and Frankie punches Luffy out of the way and snatches Luffy back up. Now at this point, Saturn uses some technique that we literally never even got another hint to paralyze all these characters, Sanji, Frankie included, and they literally cannot move. This ability is never explained and it's never used again. So it's a huge plot hole in the series because it's like, this is super useful. And if it's strong enough to hold down somebody like Sanji, it's nothing to slouch at. It completely incapacitates Sanji. Like there's nothing he could do. He just laid on the ground. It's infamous meme. Bro's just screaming. He could not move. There's nothing he could do. You even get the dialogue where Sanji says, can anyone else move? Frankie says, no, I can't. It's like I'm being held down. Vegapunk says if it's not science, it must be a devil fruit powers. We still never found out whether or not the Gorosei have devil fruit powers or they're actual demons yet, if it's all tied to Eam's power, etc., etc. There's a ton of unanswered questions about these guys. Now we go into a long flashback for Kuma at this point. We saw that Saturn had used his head pop ability on Kuma in the past as well when he was a kid. Kuma survived it. It's also unclear whether or not he has differentiating levels of the head pop ability, which could make some sense. But yes, this paralysis ability is literally stopping Sanji or Frankie or anybody from being able to protect Bonnie. But for whatever reason, it only was affecting those on the ground and those specific guys, because Bonnie actually ends up breaking out of Saturn's grip initially, and she tries using Distorted Future. It's kind of similar to Gear 4. She tries punching him, but it doesn't do any damage to Saturn. But Bonnie says that she's getting weaker, and it's all because her resolve is weakened. She doesn't have a clear view of Nika, doesn't really know what it is. The narrower her future possibilities become, like the weaker ability is, yada yada. Whatever the case, it doesn't do much. In this time frame though, we also see that somebody gave Luffy food, which is still an unresolved plot point. We never have found out who gave him food, but whoever it was, Saturn could not perceive them when they moved. That really only leaves two likely outcomes. At this point, still we don't know. It's very possible it could have been Van Augur, because Van Augur was on the island. We'll talk about him later. He has a teleportation ability which Saturn couldn't react to. Still also possible that it could have been Kizaru. That's outside chance. He was in a different spot from the last time we saw him, and he would fit the criteria of moving too fast for Saturn to see. Hopefully we do get that resolved at some point. At this point is when we see Kuma embark on the island. Kuma rushes over. You see that Saturn notices there's an explosion pretty far away from where he is. He's holding Bonnie at this point. He's about to kill her. And Kuma traverses this island very, very quickly, takes a ton of cannon fire, bullets. He just fires on through. And there's two big explosions. Saturn's like, ah, shit, there is somebody here. He drops Bonnie and prepares to stab her, and then Kuma's able to intercept him. So Saturn is very fucking slow. That's probably like one of his worst things. Speed. Everybody and their mom is able to react to this guy. He's physically very unimpressive. So Kuma intercepts this attack, gets in the way of Bonnie, but the attack, when it landed, it goes through Kuma, but he's already on his last legs, only getting powered by the Buccaneer blood. We still don't know what's going to happen with Kuma as of yet in the story. But Kuma rips out the leg, turns on Saturn, cocks back with a mean wind back, and punches the shit out of Saturn. Finally getting some get back from all those years. This slams Saturn into a building. All these buildings crash onto him. He ends up losing a leg somehow from the impact and everything. He's so fucked up. But this is, of course, in the story where it was revealed, yes, like the regeneration was crazy. He could even regrow limbs, and basically all his damage was moot. But no reaction to Kuma at that point. Got intercepted, came back, tried attacking Kuma again, but Sanji's able to intercept him, kicks his tendril away. Frankie's able to get some licks in, shoots a radical beam through Saturn. Saturn does mean mug it, like, so it seems as if like it's in line with what he said, like he doesn't give a fuck about taking damage. But it's like, dude, if he didn't have this regen, like he's taking damage from everybody. We move on to the point where Kizaru kind of has everybody else's attention. That's like when Saturn can stab through Vegapunk initially. You then have the moment where Luffy returns in Gear 5, and then this is actually Saturn's most impressive feat in the entire arc, and it's super underrated, and a lot of people miss it because it's a super small panel, but he actually does damage Gear 5, so it's pretty fucking impressive. But this is that head pop ability, so it makes a lot of sense that this would be a negating ability, some kind of telekinetic brain pop. But we have no explanation on it. Like Oda, in all honesty, I think he kind of skimped on giving us the details of this, but it might just be a situation where he doesn't want to reveal all the Gorosei's true nature. Who knows? But Saturn's dead now, so I don't know if we're ever going to get these answers. But yes, he head pops Luffy when Luffy was cocking back from a punch. Now Luffy just eats it. Obviously Luffy's going to have a much better reaction than like Bonnie and Sanji and all these other characters, but Luffy walks right through this head pop and then just obliterates Saturn, sends him flying. Doesn't really look like Luffy was using Conqueror's Haki either, but the jury's out on that. There's no lightning or anything like that in any of the interactions with any of the Gorosei. We then have Saturn having his interaction with Van Augur and Katarina Devon, where Katarina Devon walks over to Saturn as he was recovering from Luffy's attack and easily taps on his leg to take his appearance, steal his appearance. This is obviously going to be something for a plot point later, but at this point, you know, Saturn tries attacking these two, and again, he cannot connect. Van Augur teleports the two of them away after dropping a hard line about Blackbeard won in the world, and they dip away, and Saturn just looks like a dumbass yet again. So it's a recurring theme where Saturn cannot connect, and it's going to continue. So he comes back in the next chapter in his like full Zoan type form, which Sanji highlights, you know, how bizarre he looks. He looks even less human. Talks about the poison coating on his legs, and Saturn desperately tries to attack Sanji, desperately tries to attack Luffy. You see this montage that some people thought like Luffy had clones here. It's just Luffy dodging the attacks in quick succession. He can't land on Luffy. Luffy, you know, he's a joke to Luffy. Can't land on Sanji, and then that's kind of that. This obviously ends with Kizaru being able to kill Vegapunk when he kicks Sanji and all that, and it leads to, you know, Luffy grabbing Saturn and Kizaru. Obviously, if you want more details on Luffy versus Kizaru, because there's a lot of discourse about that, go watch my Luffy Kizaru analysis. He then claps the two of them together. Luffy highlights, you know, see if you can come back from this. Nothing I do can damage him, highlighting the fact that like, is it possible he has been using Conquerors? Because this is really weird dialogue if he hasn't used Conquerors, because it's like, well, nothing you do can damage him. Why don't you try using the one technique that was able to bypass, you know, specific things? Like you needed Conqueror's coating to really be able to damage Kaido. You would think that that'd be a logical character thought. So we never got that resolved. It's possible it was just plot-induced stupidity. When he used the clap attack on them, Saturn was able to use the momentum and like a boomerang come back. He tries attacking Luffy again, cannot connect. There's no chance in hell Saturn's going to connect an attack besides the one head pop ability that was Durin Egg that's like telekinetic. I don't know why he doesn't just go back to that well and try using that again. Maybe there's a cooldown period. We don't know. Why hasn't he used his paralysis ability? Why didn't he use his paralysis on Kuma when he was running. Is there a power gap? You can only do it to weaker foes. That would look really bad for Sanji, but that kind of gets debunked later because he fights some weaker people. A lot of questions. You see, this is why it's so frustrating to talk about him. He then feels the need to call the rest of the Gorosei in. That's when they all come in. You then see when Jupiter and Mercury are flanking him, he still is trying to attack Luffy. Still cannot connect, even with Luffy having his attention diverted by Jupiter going underground. Terrible look for Saturn. He tries shooting these poison bubbles. This is a new attack, and Luffy, clowns him, turns it into a baseball game. Well, turns the tree into a bat, spawns in a baseball cap, spawns in some paint, hits them all back, and attacks all Saturn. Now, what you could say, and I talked about this in my War Crew video, which could look pretty good for Saturn, is we don't really know if this attack actually affected War Crew. Now, I've talked about in the War Crew video that like War Crew's durability baseline looks better than Kaido in a lot of instances because like even Gear 5 Luffy, with Armament Haki, wasn't able to damage him, and it was able to hurt Luffy when he punched him. That speaks to it being much more dense than Luffy's Armament Haki, bare minimum. So if this attack was able to hurt War Crew, this is very impressive. Now you could argue like it's stern negating because obviously it's poison, it decays things, kind of like it was implied. But this would be a nice look for Saturn, nice like win con in some debates. If you just be like, hey, well, he's got that head pop ability, he's got this poison ability, these things can bypass really even the best durability we've seen in the series, arguably. But alas, it was never going to land on Luffy. If you really put it into perspective, like all these shots get fired and Luffy has enough time to grab something else, chomp down on the tree, spawn in these other items and hit them all back, before anybody can do anything. It's pretty comical, which is the point. At that point, you see that he kind of takes a back seat as Luffy kind of deals with some of the other people. He goes to try to stop the message. He climbs up, and this is probably another point of emphasis for him being trash, is like he goes up and he has to deal with like Chopper, Brook, Nami, Usopp, like the weaker members of the Straw Hats. When he does this, you see that Brook is able to cut off one of his legs with ease. Nami is able to damage him with Zeus, obviously. Chopper is able to guard against him with guard point, whereas Saturn was unable to pierce him. Usopp was doing his thing, and they're pretty capable and able to react to all his tendril attacks very, very consistently. You then see that as we cut away, even off screen, he was taking even more damage. We cut back, it even gets worse because he showed intentionality to want to kill Robin because of obviously her ties to being a threat to the government, and the Straw Hats are able to thwart him when he had intent to kill. Brook is able to damage Saturn multiple times, cuts him again. Nami, Zeus, Chopper continues to guard against him. So again, not a good look really at all for Saturn here. He ends up blowing them away in fairness, and he was obviously, very stressed and had something else he had to do, stop the message. So he kind of just leaves it be, goes away from them. But let's juxtapose this where like you have somebody like Frankie, for instance, in front of Kizaru. He tries to use his radical beam, immediately perception blitzed, immediately Kizaru is just evading him with no problem. From my view, it just is a terrible look for Saturn. He then goes on to try to stop the message. It looks like he could have been using Conqueror's Haki here, like Mars was, knocking out some of these transponder snails. It's still unclear though whether or not they actually have Conqueror's Haki or if it's all just an extension of Eames' Conqueror's Haki, which is still a theory and possibility at this point. You could probably claim that they have Conquerors of their own, but their powers are so weird at this point. It's hard to take a hard stance on anything that they have. We still don't even know if they're Devil Fruits. After this, we see later on, Saturn is pretty mobile, pretty agile. Like for as big as he is, he was able to jump off Jupiter, land on the giant ship, and he was attempting to attack the Straw Hats. And here the giants were saying that his attacks were too tough, his attacks were too fierce. They're just fodder giants, but at least he's overpowering them to some extent. He ends up trying to attack Bonnie. Luffy easily reacts, knocks his hands out of the way, sends a barrage of attacks at Bonnie. Luffy blocks all of them. Then Luffy and Bonnie use a combined attack where they obliterate Saturn to pieces, literally. Then it's actually pretty cool on this panel, which is an awesome panel, mind you, as all the Gorosei attempt to jump at them right before the Joy Boy Haki thing. You can still see him trying to regenerate. And Joy Boy's Haki obviously eggs all the Gorosei out of their forms, sends all the ones that were summoned back to the Holy Land. Saturn is the only one that remains. You can see him huffing and puffing though, which is interesting to kind of lead into, okay, this is the first time we really get to see them referencing stamina. And as he looks at the Iron Giant, it's pretty cool given that we understand now that, he's the reason that the Iron Giant still even exists, because, they were ordered to destroy it and everything, but he wanted and encouraged and pushed for researchers to keep studying it because he wanted to turn it to their side and use it, but it ended up biting him in the ass. With that said, we see at the end of the arc now that Saturn was sacrificed by Eam was pissed off that, you know, Joy Boy's escaped. Kind of whatever translation you get could differ. Some translations make it seem like Eam is kind of talking about how would you let Joy Boy do this, the actual Joy Boy that gave Ameth the Conqueror's haki, or if it's referencing Luffy. If it's referencing Luffy, you could argue that Saturn really just is giving you a straight admission that he's nothing compared to Luffy. Here the thing is, he gets like absolutely no diff negged by Eam. Eam just strips him of all his powers, turns him into a skeleton, ages him up. Obviously we saw that Saturn has at least lived over 200 years. So this kind of leads to the idea that they're an extension of Eam's power, because Eam can strip away the immortality like that. So a ton of questions unanswered, ton of great abilities that the guy has, but his speed is garbage, his actual durability is garbage. If not for the regen, this guy would just be, you know, blitzed and one shot by a lot of characters. But he's got great hacks if he actually has the brain to use them at any point. He's kind of just in the same tier as the other Gorosei members I've talked about. As I say in all those videos, gimmick fighters that have arguments to potentially win against people that are stronger than them simply because the regen, until we get that figured out. Could tie into Conqueror's haki, we still don't know. But, you know, they're like commander tier fighters. I don't think his feats are as good as Ethan's and Workery's for sure, but I don't think he was the worst of the Gorosei. I think Jupiter was the worst. So that's Saturn. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.